Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. We are your hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare. Welcome back, Bookends, to a special bonus episode where we will be discussing the breathtaking new novel, Second Self, a novel about confronting expectations and learning to cope with the nagging, complex questions that shape a life. Meet Kathy, a woman who never saw children as part of her future, only now she's not so sure. Discover about the minds and bodies at the mercy of natural forces and societal pressures, and read this ode to motherhood, marriage, and choice.
Chloë Ashby is an author and award-winning arts journalist. Since graduating from the Cottard Institute of Art, she has written for publications such as The Times, TLS, Guardian, FT Life and Art, Spectator, and Frieze. She's the author of 4 books: Look at This If You Love Great Art, published in 2021. Colours of Art, The Story of Art in 80 Palettes, which was published in 2022 and was also a Times Best Book of 2022. And her debut novel, Wet Paint, which was published last year to wide acclaim. Her second novel, Second Self, is out in July, and we are so excited to chat to Chloë today. So Chloë, welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on. We're so excited to speak to you. I'm too excited. People, I'm going to get told to calm down by Hannah now. I know for a fact.
I love it.
We always love to open the podcast by asking you what you are currently reading.
Yes. So there's a book that I've just started reading. If I can do that, I'm really enjoying it so far, so I feel confident recommending it. It's called Art Monsters, and it's by Laura Elkin, and it's out next month, I think mid next month. And it's just a brilliantly researched and written book about art and the body, so also kind of relevant maybe to today's discussion. In particular, the way that feminist artists have used their bodies in creative and subversive ways. And yeah, Lauren just writes so wonderfully about art and literature and culture, so I have high hopes for the rest of the book.
I love that.
Sounds actually amazing.
Yeah,
it's also got a great cover, which we shouldn't affect our decision when picking a book up, but always does, doesn't it?
No,
it totally does. Everyone's a liar. Let me tell you, everyone they're like, oh, I don't judge a book, right? Yeah, you do.
I do.
Yeah, you do. Come on.
I do too.
But I mean, speaking of covers, both Wet Paint and Second Self, I was honestly drawn to Wet Paint by seeing the cover in a bookshop. That is how I came to get hold of it, because I saw the cover and I was like, I just love it. I think there's a lot of covers with, women in precarious positions and like images of women and of women's faces, and I was just drawn straight away to yours because it's like a woman covering her face and it's quite blurred, and just like the colors of it were like sort of reds and oranges, and straight away I saw it and I was like, okay, I need to know what this is about, and picked it up, read the blurb, and of course it then came home with me. But I will happily hold my hands up and say, like, I love a cover and I'm very much drawn in by covers. And Second Self, do you want to describe the cover to our listeners?
Yes, I've actually yesterday got my hands on a finished copy. My author copies are in the post, so you've got one. That's going to sound weird, isn't it, that I just said that because people can't see us.
You're literally holding up books. So
yeah, Hannah just held up her book, which is why I just squealed. So it's kind of a pale peachy colour, and there's a black and white photograph of a woman on the cover sort of peering into a glass of water. So there's her face, and then there's the reflection of her face, and then there's this sort of peachy strip down the middle. I don't know about you two, but I never like to see exactly what a character looks like, to be told exactly what a character looks like from the cover. So this felt like a kind of a happy balance of getting a glimpse of her, and also, the kind of double image going well with the title, but without telling you exactly who she is and about her appearance.
It's a very clever cover because it gives you that sort of like jarring sense of self. And I think you also got that with Wet Paint, in how, her face is covered on the cover, and I don't really know how to describe Eve. She's a very memorable character that I will probably think about forever. But she is she's sort of living in her own head, isn't she?
Mm.
And I think that's why the cover is so great, because it's just like she's hiding from the world as much as possible while she sort of comes to terms with her own issues and her own trauma. Now, I was curious because we have spoken to authors on the podcast before about covers and our obsession with certain book cover designs, but previous authors have said that they didn't have very much input with the design. But I was curious, because of your background in art, did you have more input than others might, or?
So with wet paint, I got very lucky, I think. And the cover came to me looking pretty much exactly as it looks now, to the extent that I was worrying that I didn't have an opinion, and I started to think, oh, is the font not quite right? Like, what can I say? But it did, like you said, I think it captures so perfectly the fact that Eve is so in her head. And there are moments, in the book. There's one scene where I think it's when she's with Max and she's naked and then she covers her face, and it felt so appropriate for so many reasons. With Second Self, I did have a few more changes. Hopefully I'm now not going to sound like a really picky author.
No.
But, someone on the team found this image, which was wonderful. But initially there wasn't that strip down the middle, so you could see her entire face. And it was just slightly too much for me. So I sort of asked how we could get around that and still keep the image, because I thought the image itself worked so well. And we also played around with different colours. So this one was much more of a conversation. And I think I've been very lucky to work with a team who are kind of open to thoughts. I'm not sure how it works in other publishing houses, but yeah, they were very receptive to my feedback, which was nice.
Now, just to delve a little bit deeper into Second Self, could you tell our listeners a little bit more about Second Self and what the sort of seeds of inspiration for Second Self were, and how it kind of grew into a novel?
Yeah, so Second Self follows a couple called Kathy and Noah, and they met 10 years ago. They've been married for 8 years. They are very happily married. They're very much in love. When they first met, Noah said to Kathy, I don't imagine children in my future. And she, at the time, I think was 25, and sort of laughed along and said, well, neither do I. I'm not exactly yearning for motherhood. And now, for various reasons, she's beginning to wonder whether one day she might want a child. So it's not that she has suddenly changed her mind and that she suddenly wants children. It's more that I think it's partly the fear of regret as she's thinking ahead. Her relationship with her mother is changing, which I think is making her naturally sort of curious about what she might be like as a mother. She misses a period and she doesn't panic, and that makes her think, okay, what does that mean, the fact that I'm not panicking? So the book really follows her as it's almost as her body threatens to cheat her marriage. She so wants to stay with Noah, but if she wants a child, then she can't stay with him because he is dead set against it for various reasons that kind of come out in the book. And at the same time, she is working in conservation in a museum, and she's kind of peeling back the layers on a painting and thinking away that artworks change over time as well. So that's sort of a bit of a blurb of the book. And it really came from me in a way. At the time I wrote it, I just turned 30. I just got married, and it was just sort of the age and a time of my life where I was surrounded by, if not babies and pregnancy, then talk of babies and pregnancy. And I was beginning to, together with my boyfriend, who then became my husband, talk very seriously about whether we wanted to have a child, and if so, when. And I think it was always one of those things that I had kind of, assumed would happen, because, in a slightly old-fashioned way, in a sort of, that's what will happen, that's how it works kind of way. But obviously it is such a big decision, possibly the biggest decision someone can ever make. And I wanted to give it, enough kind of thought and consideration. And from that, I then started to think, well, wow, how much harder would this decision be if two people felt differently? And the book kind of spiraled from there. So that was a very long answer. Sorry.
Oh, I love hearing about,
Yeah.
how inspiration comes to people. And I think, me and Lydia have spoken many times about these sorts of topics. And I just found this to be such a moving reading experience. I felt it was very emotional for me reading this. I'm 28 now, and I've been with my boyfriend now for 5 years. And we often get asked like, oh, when are you guys going to have children? That's our parents will say it like, oh, when are we going to get grandchildren? Or like, there's a lot of pressure, not only from our family and from, well-meaning friends and stuff. It's the external pressures, like societal pressures saying that, you should do X, Y, and Z by a certain age. So I just felt like this book really, really resonated with me. So thank you for writing it.
Oh, well, no, thank you. That's really lovely to hear. Thank you.
No, but thank you. But yeah, it is just all the kind of questions that me and Lydia have spoken about before, about like motherhood and about choice and all those gritty things. So I'm sure we will speak about them in more depth throughout this episode, because it means a lot to both of us. I know that. So
it really does. It really does. And I think I really love what you're talking about when you were talking about her role as a conservationist in terms of working in the conservation studios at the National Gallery, and her, like you said, peeling back the layers of the painting, and in a way kind of discovering herself through the process of restoring or conserving this painting. It was such a beautiful way of exploring that. So firstly, why did you pick that painting in particular, and what role do you think that the painting and art in particular plays in the novel?
So I actually started off with her working on another painting.
Oh, wow.
Initially, she was working on a portrait, and I think I naturally, I think, personally, I'm sort of drawn to portraits a lot in terms of how they make me feel, how they move me. And so that was where I went with it first. And then I started to, write the scenes that take place in Norfolk, where her mum is based, where Kathy's mum, Jamie, is based. And I wrote about the sea, and I was writing about the beach. And then I wrote one particular scene. I'm going to have to be careful here in terms of spoilers. I don't know. So I was writing, I think it's going to be fine. I don't think this is a huge spoiler, but I was writing one scene set in Norfolk where it's a sort of memory where she and her mother come across a beached whale in Norfolk. And I was sort of researching, sort of about whales, but also whale strandings and things like this. And then I discovered this painting of a seascape, and it was one of those moments. There are sometimes these moments when you're writing, when things just sort of click, and it's so satisfying when it happens. And I don't think it happens hugely often, or at least for me, but when it does, it's great. And that was one of those moments. So I immediately sort of got rid of this other portrait and brought in this painting, which is a real painting. It hangs in the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, actually. And I kind of transported it to the National Gallery because I wanted Kathy to be in London. And then the more I sort of read about the painting, the more there were these overlaps with what was going on in Kathy's life. Yeah, so that's the painting. And I think more broadly, I mean, the book is so much about bodies and minds, and the way that those two things change over time. So in terms of the art in the book, I think, with wet paint really grew out of art. It grew out of a painting, the Manet's Bar at the Folies Bergère, which Eve visits once a week. And it did begin with that as an image. I think with Second Self, it was slightly different in that the book began with a question. And then naturally, as I always do, I sort of thought about art as I was figuring out that question, and looked at art as a way of figuring it out. And so, the more I did, the more I started to see these kind of the way that art was mirroring life, and the way that paintings are subject to kind of societal expectations and forces as well, and the way that they also change over time, and that they require care and they can deteriorate. So it just sort of fitted together so well. And I think another thing is I feel like there's often this discussion or this question of whether you can make art, whether that is art, or whether you can write or make music and also have children. The creativity and motherhood often, I think, crop up, and they're often kind of pitted against one another. And so I quite liked the idea of bringing those two topics together. I mean, obviously the state that Kathy is in, it's not motherhood, it's kind of almost motherhood. But yeah, it seemed kind of a fertile ground. That's an odd choice of fertile, but you see what I mean.
Yeah, you could see me and Lydia nodding our heads away when you were talking about creating art and motherhood and how those things sort of fit or don't fit together, because we're both actors, so we we totally understand all the things that throws up. I wanted to just touch on whilst we're talking about art and the sort of process of creating art, or as Kathy does, being a conservator, that's the word. Okay, so just being in that art world, and obviously you yourself have studied art and you sort of review exhibitions and you spend a lot of time in those worlds. I noticed something about your style of writing when it comes to fiction, and it's that it's very visual, very visceral. You can see the settings that they're walking through. There's moments where they're walking, you mentioned the beach before, where they're walking on the beach, and you talk about the way that the birds are flying and how they're looking at the birds, and you describe people's appearances and how Kathy perceives other people around her. And I just wondered if you sort of knew the way in which your experience with art seeps into your writing style. Like, is that a conscious thing? Is that something that you're aware of?
I think it happens very naturally. And I think, in the same way that my art writing seeps into my fiction, I think, again, since writing fiction, I think my arts journalism, that writing has also changed. So it's quite nice, actually, the kind of relationship between the two. I think I have always been a very visual person. And so, the way that Kathy looks at the world, and also to an extent, the way that Eve looks at the world, because she also is constantly like cataloging and observing, and obviously for her it's sort of a form of distraction. She would rather go around thinking about other people's lives and how other people are appearing than her own. But yeah, I think the way that they both are and the way they both look at the world is to an extent the way that I look at the world. And yeah, I mean, it's funny because before I really settled on writing about art in a kind of journalistic sense, I tried quite hard to move away from it. I sort of thought, no, this is too niche. I need to write about more things. I should write about, I should do travel writing, and I should write about food and drink and all this stuff. And I would find myself smuggling art into everything I wrote to the extent that I think my editors got quite fed up with it. I'm like, oh God, not another, why are we talking about paintings? This is not relevant. So I do think it is just so a part of me at this point. And, that's not to say that art is always going to be a part of my novels, but I do think that kind of visual way of looking at the world probably will be.
And I think as well, for me, it brings such an extra dimension to the novel, being able to really immerse yourself in a visual world. To me, it's just as essential as learning about the characters and the narrative, but there is this extra element on top of it where it just feels so vivid to be in that world with them. And I think that so effective, because when you finish, I was seeing that painting in my head all of the time.
Oh, that's so great to hear.
And at every stage, because we uncovered different elements of it, I'm like, oh, it's changing and it looks like this now. And it was such a wonderful kind of experience to go alongside Kathy's journey itself. So please keep the art in the books, please. Don't stray away, because this is what we love about your writing.
Okay, I will. I'll do it just for you.
That's an order, so there's no choice now. But I really wanted to ask, because this is such a novel about choice, and particularly in relation to motherhood and pregnancy, but it also explores kind of the more ambiguous areas that can cause us to doubt our choices, or even change choices that we thought we were completely, set on, and being able to kind of reflect on our choices and think, okay, well, can they change? If they do change, what effects will that have around me? We see so much pressure, particularly on women, to make these kind of life-changing or life-altering decisions. And it's interesting to see Kathy explore some of those. What do you think it is? And this is quite a big question, so don't panic. But what do you think it is about life's choices for women particularly, that makes such compelling reading?
Oh, that is a big question. I mean, with this particular question, the choice of whether or not to have a child, which then also I think important to remember, starts off as a seemingly very simple yes or no, but then can sort of splinter into so many more questions and choices and paths. So, okay, is the answer yes? Is it possible? Like, in which way are you going to have a child if it's not the obvious natural way? So that's one thing. I think that it's so much more complicated than at first it seems. We talk about choices and decisions as if there's one thing or another, and then great, boom, you've made your choice and on you go. And this isn't like that, I think, because as I say, if the answer is yes, that happens. If the answer is no, you then probably have however many years of listening to people say, oh, well, just you wait, like in a few years you'll change your mind, just wait till the longing hits. And you're not closing the door on it by making a choice, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I think also with this particular choice of whether or not to have a child, it's something that, I guess in a way I can only speak for myself, but I suppose some people know very early on they want what they don't want. For others, it can be something that changes over time. That was something that I kind of really wanted to explore with the book, this idea that we are allowed to change our minds and that it's natural to change our minds, but also how difficult that is when you're sort of part of a couple, a partnership, and you're not changing together. And then is that a betrayal, or is that sort of to be expected in life that you're not always going to, I don't know, feel the same way about things? I feel like I'm really doing a dance around your question by asking loads of other questions. but I
think that is the only way to answer this question. There is no definitive answer whatsoever.
Yeah, but I think it's also, like Hannah said at the very start, I think it's relatable because I think it's something that at a certain point in our lives, so many of us are going to think about, and not just women, all of us, but it's particularly kind of tricky for a woman because there's also the biological hate, the way it's described as that kind of biological clock, but it is that, and there's sort of only a finite amount of time that you have to make your decision, which I guess is where things like egg freezing come into it, which is a whole nother kind of ball game. But yeah, I hope I've sort of, as well as twirling around the question, vaguely answered it.
I will say that is a satisfactory answer, yes.
Okay, good.
I have a quote. So this is on the topic of what we've just been talking about, but I feel like just to give our listeners a real sense of the novel, I feel like this quote would be perfect for what we were just talking about. So I hope you don't mind me reading your own book back to you.
No, I'd love it.
It is a small quote. So it's Noah and Kathy having a conversation, and I think it's in relation to somebody has just asked them about whether they might ever change their minds. And I think Kathy's kind of at this point where she's realized that it's so hard not to give spoilers.
It is really hard, isn't it?
It is. She's just kind of at this, what we were speaking about. They made this choice, several years ago, and she was so sure of it. And now she's kind of not sure whether she's sort of unsure about that initial decision making. Describing it so well. So here's the quote. I'll be quiet. He shook his head. I know it's not the same, me saying I don't want children and you saying you don't want children. It should be, but it's not. And for that, I'm sorry. He was right, of course. If a man doesn't have a child, people don't think of his life as incomplete. They don't assume he's harboring some innate longing or talk of regret and backup plans and a lack of meaning. His happiness isn't bound up in family. There's no social obligation. And I just thought like that articulates it so perfectly, how it feels that the pressure is so much on the woman, and it creates such an uneven dynamic in relationships that it feels like the woman is the one that is sort of having to make the choice. And, you know, if she does want a baby but the partner doesn't, then kind of what does she do with that? And if she doesn't want a child but a partner does, what do you do with that? And it's just this sort of really confusing back and forth that I never kind of considered until, you know, I read your book. And I don't think this kind of narrative has been like represented in literature before, and I just found it so interesting. But I also wanted to talk about the epigraph. Am I right in that? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
And it's the Adrian Rich quote where she says, "The body has been made so problematic for women that it's often seemed easier to shrug it off and travel as a disembodied spirit." And I just thought those two quotes together are just perfect. And it sort of leads into a question I wanted to ask about how deeply detailed this reading experience was in terms of the female body and the way that you explore the female body and the sort of the things that we don't see represented as much, you know, things like you were saying about egg freezing, abortion, miscarriage, periods even, you know, all these sort of topics that are sometimes taboo and aren't sort of brought to the forefront, and also aren't necessarily conversations that people might have in their relationships and things like that. And I just love the idea of thinking of the body as a disembodied spirit, especially when it comes to women and how women's bodies have been perceived as problematic. And also you wrote in your blurb of the book about the body being at the mercy of natural forces, which is also great. I'm rambling because there's so many quotes that are coming to mind.
This is nice. You can just, you know, keep it coming.
But I wanted to ask, what do you think draws you to exploring the female body in the way that you do and the sort of level of detail that you have with Second Self?
I mean, I think, first of all, just living in a female body, experiencing the world in one, you know, stuff like periods, it's so every day. I mean, it's not every day, thank God. But you know what I mean? It's so ordinary. And I really love to read and to write sort of fiction that deals with really the little moments in a life as well as the big moments in a life. And something like having a period, to me, sort of falls into that category of the little moments in the same way that, I don't know, making lunch might. Obviously, sort of as we touched on earlier, there is, I mean, it's, I think the first page, it's when Kathy gets her period, or her period is late, sorry, and she is worrying because she's not panicking. And so it is an ordinary thing, but it can also so easily kind of flip into a very big thing by being absent. Or on the other hand, if you think you're pregnant and then suddenly it appears. Do you see what I mean? So it's sort of so ordinary, but also can have such an impact on that day and on you as a person. I think, you know, the body is something, I think that Wet Paint and Second Self are quite different books in a lot of ways, particularly the tone. But I think that the body is a theme that's kind of constant across both. So in Wet Paint, Eva's a life model and she's thinking a lot about the way that, you know, or maybe she's not thinking, but the book itself is sort of exploring a lot the difference and the kind of disconnect between the way that we feel and the way that we appear, and dealing with the ways in which bodies are on display and bodies are looked at, particularly female bodies being looked at by men. And with Second Self, I suppose it's sort of getting into the nitty-gritty of existing within a female body and the way that it changes over time. As you said, the way that it's kind of subject to natural forces. I don't think I will ever get bored of writing about the body, and particularly the female body. And it's something that I kind of endlessly fascinated by in art as well. So yeah, I think we'll see. Maybe that will also be something like art that will always crop up. I also just want to say, just thinking back to what you said before, I feel the need to say that it's almost like I'm defending him, like he's my friend. But I think it's easy to, you know, once you've read the book, I think it will become clear for listeners, you know, Noah's not a bad guy. Noah is a wonderful, loving, kind, endlessly patient man. And there are very legitimate reasons why he won't budge on his standpoint. why he is not willing to have a child with Kathy, however much he loves her. And that's the kind of mad, difficult thing about this, is that there is no compromise if one of you wants a child and one doesn't. There's no middle ground there. You can't have half a child. I mean, that would be weird and messy. But yeah, I just sort of felt a need to sort of do a quick yay Noah note.
I love Noah. I love him. And I know that Lydia does. So we're very much.
Oh my gosh, there is for those listening, there is something that Kathy has to do, and it's not a pleasant thing that she has to do, and it was really quite frightening in a way that she has to do by herself. And despite everything going on, despite it just being the hardest thing ever, Noah is still there to help. And I think that says more about his character than anything else in the novel for me. That act of kindness, the act of love in just being able to be there for him. When you read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But just being there was just, honestly, I'm like emotional talking about it, because it really is so moving. And Noah and Kathy are just such a beautiful embodiment of love. I think it's a perfect example of, you can love someone with every iota of your being, but you can disagree. And that sometimes it's about, okay, well, now we are different people, because I know that Noah and Kathy, they sort of grow together. They've been together, married for 8 years, together for 10. They grow together and they change together, but they're not necessarily ending up in the same place. And it's such a fascinating dynamic. What was it like for you as a writer to kind of create that dynamic and explore it?
I loved spending time with them. With Wet Paint, I was so in Eve's head and experiencing life as Eve, which is kind of great and fun and stressful and sad and all the emotions. And I loved spending time with her, but I also really appreciated just being a part of a kind of a stable, loving, supportive marriage. It sounds so weird, actually. I've just sort of hearing myself say it. It sounds like I'm some weird interloper who's sort of inserted myself into their house, into their flat. Anyway, so I really loved spending time with them on the page. And it was really important to me that, just to show the love that was there between them. And as I said, there was no one kind of quote unquote bad guy in this situation, because there isn't really, like, that no one is doing something. When two people disagree or have different opinions, or start to at least wonder whether they want different things, it's not because one of them is a bad person, or they are doing it because they want out of the relationship. Or Kathy, to begin with, tries to tell herself that she hopes that she can't have children, because then her marriage is safe. And that's how much she loves him and how much she cherishes what they have. She sort of, in a way, would rather that having children wasn't a possibility, because then that's that. And then she doesn't have to grapple with this little question mark that has sort of emerged in her mind and that she can't quite get rid of.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you just made me think of that I really loved with the way that you explored their relationship and their dynamic. I think there's a moment quite early on in the book, and I remember writing the quote down on my phone, but I'm not going to go looking for it. But I know it was something around, I think Kathy says something about they could afford to be selfish, and it infuriated me that it has to be perceived in that way, and that the sort of validity of a relationship that doesn't include children. She also says something about somebody saying, "Oh, do you want to start a family?" And she says, as starting a family as though we aren't already one. And that whole calling into question that a relationship isn't valid because they don't have children, and therefore that doesn't equal a family, and they mustn't be whole because they're without those children. And I just thought, you brought so many interesting questions to the surface with their relationship. And I feel like this book is going to start so many great conversations. Like, I really want everyone to read it, because I'm like, just everyone needs to speak about these subjects and like understand how like frustrating so many of the topics are. And so again, thank you.
No, thank you. That is the kindest thing someone could say. So Thank you. Yeah, I hope it does. I mean, I hope that it is relatable and that, I don't know, it's so difficult. Everything around motherhood and this stage that is sort of almost motherhood, I think it's so easy to say the wrong thing, isn't it? Whether you don't want children and as you say, you're sort of dealing with questions and assumptions that isn't a sort of fixed position, that's a position that's going to change, or whether you are trying and it's not happening and it's hard and it's sad, and you're seeing sort of pregnancy and babies around you, or you're pregnant and you're uncomfortable, or you have a small child and you're stuck at home. I think with this whole thing, it's such a minefield in a way, and I've felt it myself and with my friends. I think sometimes it can be so tricky that it's easier to kind of retreat inwards and not talk about it, and actually we are all so much better off, or would be so much better off, talking openly and just kind of with as much empathy as possible. But yeah, they definitely do sort of bear the brunt of some kind of comments that are often sort of said in a well-meaning way, but there's a lack of understanding there.
I wanted to ask a question about the friendship between Kathy and Anna, because I love their friendship and I love reading books that explore like the power of female friendship, because I think it is so much more intimate than a male on male friendships. If that is how you would describe it. It sounds like
that was a good description.
But it feels so much more intimate, and that we really understand each other, and that's the only word I can think of to describe it, is that it is intimate. And I think with what you were saying about trying to navigate those conversations, those more difficult conversations, and if you're like, I don't have children but I have friends that do have children, and it's the understanding between the two friends, and sometimes you're going to get frustrated with each other for the fact that one of you doesn't understand what it's like to have children, and then the other one of you would get frustrated that they're not seeing the validity of your life because you don't have children. And there's all these sort of complicated, nuanced situations that we definitely see through Anna and Kathy. And I was really curious, why did you want to write that more like complicated side of things? Because there are moments in the book where, without giving any spoilers, they maybe don't impart information that you would expect to share with your best friend, and the sort of navigating secrets and things that feel uncomfortable to share because of the other person's current situation. So yeah, why did you want to explore the more complicated side of female friendship?
I love to read about female friendship and to write about it as well. And I think, they really do have a friendship that is so intimate and tender, and they've known each other for years and kind of grown up together. Noah used to date Anna before he got together with Kathy, which sort of sounds strange, but works. It worked out, in the best possible way. I think I wanted Anna there to show another side. So there are two, I guess. I mean, Anna is a sort of a real key friendship within the book. And then there's also a kind of unlikely or surprising friendship that Kathy strikes up with a woman called Robin, who she meets when she starts kind of looking into fertility. And I just wanted to show with these other women, to sort of show women who are at the same age but in a very different place in terms of fertility and motherhood. And so Kathy isn't sure what she wants, but this question has sort of arisen. Anna has a baby, a very sweet little baby, who was quite fun to write himself, and desperately wants a second. And then there's Robin, who is single and so certain that she wants a child, and so decides to go down the egg freezing route. And it's really difficult to navigate because, I mean, Kathy she does exactly what I've sort of just said that we shouldn't do. She does retreat inwards, and she feels like she can't be honest about how she's feeling with Anna for fear of sort of Anna thinking she's selfish if she so desperately wants a child. Here Kathy is sort of umming and ahhing, and kind of in the same way then with Robin doesn't have a partner. She would love that stability. She also is very much ready to have a baby, and Kathy is here with a husband and a kind of a stable home setup. Again, I'm kind of trying to be careful of giving spoilers. It's not like this is a twisty book with secrets, but there still are things that I feel I shouldn't say. But yeah, I just wanted to, I suppose, explore those kind of rifts that can come up, the kind of chasms that can just emerge at this stage of life, where we have all sort of, Anna and Kathy are a great example because they've known each other for so long. You sort of grow up and you're sort of vaguely doing the same things all the time up until this point, even if your careers go in different directions and someone gets married, someone doesn't. But I think the thing that really creates a big difference in terms of day-to-day life and the way that you live your life and things like that is having a child. And so yeah, it's a time in our life where everything is quite uncertain.
And I think that if that doesn't convince you to read the book, I don't know what will. Because it is genuinely one of those things where I think that if this was a book club book and you're all sat around, every single person would have got something different from it. It's not, there is no kind of universal takeaway from this because everybody has a different experience. I mean, me and Hannah had vastly different experiences. I'm a mum, she's not. We've got, we have completely different worldviews in terms of, our lived experience. And yet it was profoundly affecting for both of us. And I can't recommend this enough to people at any stage of your life, just to give it a read and just to experience it, because it is actually just incredible. It really is.
Thank you so much, Lydia. I'm so glad to hear that. And also, like, beyond the baby question, the baby decisions are hard, like, no matter what they are. I am terrible at making the most simple of decisions. So also, even if, clearly that's what the crux of the book is about, the whether or not to have children, but also I think just that grappling with making a choice, where to live, who to be with if you want to be with someone, what to do professionally, what to wear in the morning. Isn't
it just, I mean, it is a celebration of both the huge decisions and the very small ones that we all have to deal with, and it's just absolutely, it is incredible. Before we let you go, this is essential, I need to get some good book recommendations off you. So if you've got any good book recommendations that you've read recently or some of your all-time faves, please give us the knowledge.
Yes. Okay, so I'm sort of looking around at my shelves at what I've read recently. Well, this is another art book that I have just read, another brilliant non-fiction book. It's called Thunderclap, and it's by Laura Cumming, who is the chief art critic for The Observer. And this is it's sort of part memoir about her father, who was an artist, and it's also about her love of Dutch 17th century art. Again, vaguely linked because we have the Dutch artist Second Self. But it's wonderful. She writes beautifully. Her visual analysis is, I think, second to none. So I would really recommend that. Novels, fiction. I'm looking at my pile. I read fairly recently and loved The Anniversary by Stephanie Bishop, who I'm actually doing an event with in the second week of July. It's a fantastic novel, and sort of the story is brilliant and so crisp and kind of almost thriller-like, but it's also a really great book about the creative process and about writing. So that I would recommend too. And actually now I've just remembered one other, because I'm also doing an event with this author. It's a book called OK Days by Jenny Mustard. And it sort of has a bit of crossover actually in terms of, it is sort of not the central conceit of the novel, but the book follows Sam and Luke, who sort of meet, and it's a kind of will they, won't they situation. It kind of reminded me of One Day in a way, but one of them doesn't want children, the other one is sort of less clear. But it's just, she writes so well about kind of, human emotion and It's great. I feel like I'm running out of words, but it's brilliant, and I would recommend that too.
So many good recommendations. I need to get to all of those. Now, I'm very sad that it's come to the end of the time, because I hadn't actually realised until Lydia said. I was just, in my own little happy bubble.
You'd gone to Hannah Land. This is what she does. She gets too involved. She gets too excited, and then I have to remind her.
Pull the plug.
We're back in the room.
Pull the plug. She has to. Now,
I'm the killjoy.
Before we let you go, what is next for you? Because I finished Wet Paint, I finished Second Self. So yeah, I know that you're just releasing this, but I need to know, is there something else coming?
Well, so I am working on a third novel, but it's very early days. So it may be a little bit of a longer wait. This was quite a quick turnaround. I mean, I actually wrote Second Self before Wet Paint came out, because there was such a big gap between Wet Paint being bought and published. And, also it was lockdown and I had no one to see, and my freelance work dried up. So I thought, okay, I need to do something productive. But there is a third novel that I am, working on. I say working on, I am working on it, but it's early days. But in the meantime, I will be continuing to write, my art exhibition reviews and artist interviews and stuff as well. So that might have to keep you going in the meantime.
I'll live, I'm sure. I will wait. I'm sure it'll be very much worth the wait. Chloë, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on A Pair of Bookends, and for just this wonderful chat that I feel like we'll have a lot of our female listeners being like, yes. Hopefully male listeners, actually taking something from this, because it needs to be a wider conversation. I'm talking with my hands again. Where can our listeners find you on social media?
I am on Twitter and Instagram at Chloë L. Ashby. I am not on TikTok because I am a grandma. I have a website as well, which is just chloeashby.com. But yeah.
Amazing. So listeners, go give Chloë a follow. Go buy Second Self, which is out in July. I demand that you buy yourself a copy, and also get yourselves a copy of Wet Paint, which is out now in paperback, I believe. I will pop a link to both those in the show notes. And if you would also like to give us a follow, you can do so at apairofbookendspod on Instagram and at apairofbookends on Twitter and TikTok. I am also a grandma trying to navigate TikTok. It's a disaster, but we're trying it anyway. It's a whole thing. And if you enjoyed this episode, of course, please do rate, review and subscribe, as it helps us to reach more listeners. And it also helps us to get to chat to even more amazing authors like Chloë. So yeah, thank you so much, Chloë. I've loved having you on, and I'm going to be thinking about your book forever. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you both so much. It's been a total pleasure to chat to you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.